This section is going to deal with what makes a food healthy and how to know if a food is healthy. The first thing you want to think about is animals in the wild. Animals can teach humans a lot of things. We modeled the airplane after the dynamic of the bird flying. And so animals in the wild, when it comes to weight loss, we can learn a lot about weight loss just seeing how they eat, because animals in the wild don't struggle with being overweight. And one of the things to think about is if you were a wild animal, let's say you just got lost in the wild. You got deserted on an island, or you got lost in a forest, or you had to survive on your own. What kind of foods would you eat if you were out in the wild, out in a forest, out wherever? What kind of foods would you eat? Now, assuming that you could find food, that you had access to some food around in the environment, this isn't a deserted island with absolutely nothing growing on it. What kinds of foods would you eat? If you could have access to a river, you would probably try to fish. You would probably try to find fruits on the trees or vegetables growing somewhere. Now, the thing with vegetables is you have to plant them, but maybe there's some wild vegetables or something growing. You would just look at the vegetation and try to find things to eat growing on the island or growing in the forest or wherever you can find food, right? There's a reason why, if push came to shove and we had to live in the wild and we had to choose foods that grew naturally, they would come from the ground. Food from the ground is the most dense nutrient-wise. It has the most minerals because the metals and the minerals that we need in our body come from the ground. So our bones are made out of calcium, for example. We need calcium. We need iron. We need zinc. We need magnesium and phosphorus. And all of these things come from the ground. And if we have a lack of these things, serious problems can occur. There's a problem in the East. I'm not sure what country exactly, but people who don't get enough iodine, they can get these huge tumors on their neck, if you've ever seen that. And that's just from a lack of iodine, let alone a lack of other things. If you get a lack of iron, that can be fatal. You don't want to have too much iron, especially as a man, because too much iron in your body, too much blood in your body can cause a heart attack. And that's why men are more prone to heart attacks than women until a woman reaches menopause, because women lose blood and they don't have as much muscle mass. And muscle is supplied by blood, and men have a lot more muscle mass, so they naturally have a lot more blood. So if you're a man, don't take iron pills. You can have too much iron, but if you have too little iron and become anemic, other things can occur as well. But if you don't get enough calcium, your bones become brittle. If you don't get enough magnesium, all kinds of things can happen. So we need the minerals that are in the ground, and the way that we get those are from the vegetables and the vegetation that comes from the ground. Vitamins also come from fruits and from vegetables that come from the ground. So really the ground is the best place to get food to nourish your body. The closer a food is to the ground, the more real food it is and the healthier it is for you. So to know if a food is healthy, how far do you have to track it back to the ground or to its original source? However many steps it takes to get back to knowing where it came from determines how healthy it is. So if you take a casserole where it has stuff that you just aren't sure where it came from, it's likely that that's not going to be as healthy as something for you as, for example, an orange, which you know exactly where it came from. It came from a tree. You know exactly where salmon came from. It probably came from a farm these days, but let's say in the natural, it would have come from a river or from the ocean. You know where seafood comes from. You know where fruit comes from. You don't have to eat these things just by themselves. But if you have a hard time distinguishing what a food is made out of, then chances are it's probably not as healthy. Whereas something where you know exactly where it came from, you know it's healthy because it came from the ground or from the ocean or wherever it came from. Another example is broccoli. We know where broccoli comes from, or nuts. But things like pizza, we can gather together all the ingredients in our mind and figure out where each one came from. And that's a good thing to do. And the more you practice it, the easier it is and the quicker you can do it. You can do it in just like 5 seconds. Just look at a food and just assess where it came from and know just on the scale how healthy it is. So pizza, you have the dough, which is probably came from white flour. So that's not the healthiest thing. I am very strongly against eating white flour, but I do believe you should not restrict yourself. And of course, I eat pizza sometimes because it's delicious, but white flour is not the healthiest thing. It supposedly came from the ground. The only problem is they process it so much. So there's white flour, there's cheese, which came from a cow. You have pepperoni, you have vegetables. So you can pretty quickly assess where a pizza comes from. What about ice cream? You have the sugar, you have the milk and the cream, or I actually don't know what's in ice cream. But the thing is, there's a ton of sugar and probably a lot of added sugar and probably preservatives and chemicals. And really, ice cream might not be the best thing because we just don't know exactly where all the ingredients came from. And this is why cooking from home can be so healthy because you know exactly what you put in and you're obviously not going to put in chemicals in your own home. Or a frozen dinner. Where does a frozen dinner come from? You know, there's probably a lot of preservatives in that frozen dinner to keep it on the shelf in the freezer in the grocery store, and probably a lot of other things too. And when you read the ingredients on the back of a product, the more ingredients it has, the more likely it's not going to be that healthy. Because how many ingredients does an orange have? It comes from a tree. It has one ingredient. It's an orange. I love buying raw oats, and on the ingredient label, it says ingredients oats. Whereas if you get the packaged oats that has sugar added to it, there's all kinds of stuff on the ingredients list. And it shouldn't be that way. Oats are oats are oats. So knowing that I am purchasing the raw oats and that it's only made out of oats, that's all it is, that is so reassuring to me, and it does make my body feel so good after eating it. Whereas if you eat something with a ton of added sugar, it can seem like it would be healthy, but because of all the stuff added, it does not make you feel good. And that's a big sign that something's not healthy, is if it hurts your stomach after you eat it, or if it makes you feel sick, or if you just don't feel that good after eating it. So if you have the option between certain foods, it's best and healthiest to try to eat the version of it that is closest to its source. So if you have the option between an apple, applesauce, or an apple pie, which one of those is closest to its natural form, to the source of where it came from? The apple. The apple comes from a tree. Applesauce would be next healthiest because you know that there's some sugar mixed in and it is made from apples. And then the apple pie obviously is the least healthiest because there's stuff that you just don't even know what's in there, especially if you buy it from the grocery store. Another example would be peanuts. You have shelled peanuts, you have peanut butter, and then you have something like a Snickers bar that has peanuts in it. But, of course, the shelled peanuts are the healthiest, and then peanut butter does have stuff added, but it's still pretty healthy, still made from a lot of peanuts. But the Snickers bar, even though there's peanuts in there, it has so much other stuff that you know that it's not that great. And you also don't really know where exactly that stuff comes from, all the added sugars and all of that stuff. There's carrots versus carrot cake. There's corn versus cream of corn versus cornbread. So you can kind of see that the easier you can track something back and the less steps it takes you to track it back to its original source, the healthier it is and in the most natural state it is. And that's the kind of food you want to try to eat as much as you possibly can. Whole, natural food in its natural form. Of course, you have to allow for tastiness and for cooking and for combining foods and for all kinds of stuff. But even with foods that are combined or are cooked together, you can pick apart where it came from. And the healthier it will be healthier if you can pick apart those things and track them back easily to their source, their origin. And this is good to do because you can kind of trick yourself into thinking you're eating vegetables if you eat a pizza, let's say, and there's a ton of white flour in the dough, a ton of cheese, a ton of other stuff, a lot of animal meat and everything, and then maybe some mushrooms or tomatoes sprinkled on. And you can think you're getting vegetables and that you're eating vegetables because there's a few vegetables on the pizza, but the majority of that food is not vegetables. Or for example, cornbread. Just because there's little pieces of corn in the bread doesn't mean that you're actually really eating corn. There's a little bit of corn for flavor and looks and everything and to make it taste like cornbread, but the majority of that food is the bread, is the flour, and is the sugar. So it can be really tricky for people to think that they're getting vegetables when the majority of the food is not vegetables. And just because you add a couple vegetables on doesn't mean you're actually getting the nutrients from the vegetables. You really want to get the nutrients and not just put a couple vegetables on something and say, okay, I'm eating vegetables. If you can track it back to its source and eat it as close to its source as possible, you will be getting so many nutrients, and that's what keeps your stomach feeling full. That's what keeps your body energized, and that's what keeps you satiated and happy and not feeling hungry, is when your body actually gets nutrients. And choosing something as close to the source is only if you have the option. You obviously have the option if you go to the grocery store and do your own shopping. You can get food as close to the source all the time. But if you're at a friend's or you are at a restaurant or there's just not that many options, don't feel guilty if you don't get something that's super close to the source. Or if you're treating yourself or having part of your 20% in the 80-20 rule, you don't have to feel guilty. This is really if you have the option. If you are at a party, let's say, and they for some reason have an apple and applesauce and apple pie, I mean, take a little bit of the apple pie for taste, take some of the applesauce if you want it, but then try to eat the apple for the nutrients and to feel full, and the other things just for taste and for flavor and for treats. And then the opposite of eating something closest to its source is eating things that are fake food. So these are things that are made with unnatural ingredients that don't come from the ground and are very far away from the ground. The worst example is trans fat, which is in a lot of packaged food. Trans fat is made in a lab. It is completely man-made. It's not even real fat. And then things like artificial flavors, which you see on almost every packaging. You see on all the cereal, all the granola bars, just everything has artificial flavor. It seems like everything. And then sugar, white sugar especially, and all the different disguised names of sugar, which if you do a Google search and type in disguised names of sugar or names of sugar, you will see all of the scientific words of sugar listed there. And that's why you want to get foods with a short ingredient list, because foods that aren't close to their natural source and tend to have a huge long list of ingredients, you'll notice that the words get more and more scientific as the list goes on, and that's because those are all the chemicals and all the sugars, and it just gets so far away from its source and becomes really quite not as good for your body. And you want to try to just take a glance at the ingredients list when you are shopping as much as you can if you're buying something new or something packaged. And as you get used to it, you can really quickly assess if something is fake food or real food by the ingredients list and how long it is and what foods are the first few items, because the way that the ingredients list is listed is the most abundant food in that product is listed first. So if something is basically made out of sugar, you'll see corn syrup being the first ingredients. If something is mostly made out of oats, you'll see oats being the first ingredients. And then the less ingredients there are in that thing, the farther down the list it gets. Another thing is you want to shop the perimeter of the grocery store, because if you think about it, the perimeter is where there's doors to access trucks who are bringing in fresh loads of food that can expire quickly. So you have your dairy, you have your meats, you have your produce, your breads, and those are going to be the freshest foods and the foods most natural to their source, whereas the middle sections of a grocery store have the packaged food and the food with a bunch of preservatives so that it can stay on the shelf for a long time, and foods that aren't really close to their source. So it's great to be able to eat healthy, but only if you know what foods to actually choose. So I hope that this lesson showed you how to be able to choose foods and how to just know kind of quickly if it's a good option for you.